Welcome to the shoebox. So like a lot of people, I have an Ender 3, a Pro in my case, and as you can see it has been modified just a little bit. Some of the stuff here is necessary and some of the stuff was more experimental. However, I've been increasingly bumping up against the limitations of the Ender. I've been wanting to print in ABS and other more exotic materials, and they usually require an enclosure. This in itself isn't enough of a reason to abandon Old Faithful here, but being able to print larger and faster has always been in the back of my mind. So I've finally taken the plunge and I'm going to build a Voron. So, Vorons. I guess they've enjoyed a bit of a rise in popularity over the past few years, but in case you don't know what they are, a quick summary would be that they are an open source design for a collection of high performance 3D printers maintained by a group called Voron Design. The designs are all free and open source, so you can pick a model that suits your fancy and start building one yourself. When it comes to high performance printers with an enclosure, Vorons are far from the only game in town. I think the first product to really kick things off was the crowdfunded Bambu Lab X1 and X1C. They really gave the industry a wake-up call, and now other manufacturers are scrambling to get a slice of the pie, kicking off a bit of an arms race to see who can print the fastest, with Creality probably being the closest out-of-the-box solution with their K1 series. Prusa are trying to get in on the action, but yeah, good luck to them. The price of Bambu Lab products are super competitive and can potentially end up cheaper than a Voron build, but for a chronic tinkerer like me, the idea of a closed ecosystem and iffy future support makes my butt cheeks clench. The Voron is totally open and easily fixable should the need arise. It's also easily customizable to be what you want. All these are things I value, so the Voron was an easy choice. With my Voron, I chose to build a 300mm cubed V2.4. The latest version is designated R2 for revision 2. So one word about kits. There are many kit options out there, but the two that pop up most in discussion are LDO and FormBot. The LDO is supposed to be the premium choice, and it comes with a premium price tag. It's mostly because it includes a bunch of mods in the kit. Now the FormBot, when I purchased it around about 2 months ago, did not include any of that stuff, and it was a bare bones kit that followed the BOM quite closely. But at the time of editing, it now comes with a bunch of extras for the same ridiculously low price, so in my opinion, it's a no-brainer to go with the FormBot. If you have concerns with the quality of the FormBot, don't worry, spoiler alert, it turned out great. So with that information in hand, I just ordered a kit and hey presto, I have a Voron. But not so fast. These days, kits make getting the hardware needed much easier than back in the day when people had to source all the components themselves. But you still need to acquire all the printed parts. You can get these from the PIF program, the Print It Forward program, that Voron runs, but where's the fun in that? The parts are spec'd to be printed in ABS for heat resistance, but ABS Plus is also an acceptable choice. The Ender 3, while not ideal for ABS, is actually sort of able to print ABS. I mean, it says so right here. In the Plus variety, it becomes very much doable even without an enclosure due to the lower warping characteristics. I did find that success was dependent on using a PEI sheet for the bed though. The glass bed was useless. Even with ABS Plus, it was warping. Also for safety, I would upgrade the PTFE tube to Capricorn tube at the minimum, or get an all-metal hot end. Melty PTFE fumes are really not so good for you. I won't go through the whole build in detail since it's been done so many times and the manual is extremely thorough, but I will touch on the issues I faced while getting everything up and running. First up was the actual manual. So if you follow the links from the Voron site to the GitHub page, it will direct you to a page with a link to the files at the bottom. Don't use those, they're way old. Instead, you need to go up here and get to the repo to download the latest version. The next issue was with the T-nuts. The manual specifies using an M5 and an M3 screw in the Y-axis, butted up against each other in the end, but they're actually too long and they won't clear the linear rail screw if you have a screw mounted in the end hole. So when you're mounting the linear rails, skip the end holes and if needed, put an extra screw in the hole just before the end. The next issues weren't really an issue, but the FormBot kit came with a BTT Pi instead of a Raspberry Pi, and this was the source of a few deviations from the manual. First, the mounting holes are a little different, so the mounting bracket supplied in the Voron pack will actually not fit. It's just one hole that is off, so you can still get away with just not inserting that screw, but if you want to, go and download a proper mount. One feature I like on the BTT Pi is that it can be supplied with 24 volts instead of just 5. To do that, you need to remove the jumper here next to the USB socket. Then you can hook up the 24 volt supply to the screw terminals here, and that leaves you with an extra 5 volt supply you can use for something else. Setup of the BTT Pi is also a little more involved compared to the Raspberry Pi. With the Raspberry Pi, you have images that you can download that have everything set up for you, but you need to mostly do that yourself on the BTT version. First, you need to get an image for the BTT. With that in hand, you can flash it to your SD card. The flash process is the same as for a Raspberry Pi. Once flashed, open up the card on a PC and look for the system.cfg file, and in there, you can set up your Wi-Fi, SSID and password. There are some formatting issues if your password has special characters in it, so if needed, use escape characters or just change the password to something without those characters. Stick the card in the Pi and then once it's up and running, SSH in using Windows command line. The user and password are both BIQU. I'd change the password at some point though. Once you're in, you can get KIAUH, whatever it's pronounced as. I'm just going to call it Clipper Helper. All the commands are on the Clipper Helper site. With Clipper Helper, you can use it to install all the stuff you need. So in our case, that's just Clipper, Moonraker, and Mainsail. It will ask you some questions during the setup process, but I just use defaults for everything. With that done, you should be able to just follow the rest of the official setup instructions. One last issue I had was with the LEDs in the Stealthburner. On my initial attempt, the LEDs turned out to be all kinds of weird colours. The fix was simple though. The official config says that the default RGB order for the NeoPixels is GRB, but for some reason the order is set to be GRBW. Switching that back to GRB made it work properly. So after all that, what's the verdict? I'm actually pretty happy. So before any tuning, this is how my first print looks. This is just the default profile in Cura. It's pretty clean in my opinion. There are some ringing artifacts which I suspect will get reduced when I get an accelerometer, and there's some bulging on the corners which you can see which are probably going to be removed after I do some pressure advanced tuning. The layers otherwise look consistent, and the overhangs look okay. So for a comparison, here is the cube printed on my Ender 3. It's the same filament, it's just some cheap ABS Plus I had from Amazon, and you can see that there's absolutely no comparison. The Ender version has all sorts of funky going on. You can see the surface quality is not so great. There's all sorts of problems with the overhangs. The bridging in the middle, that's just completely failed. The top surface is also not so great, it's quite rough. And you can see, although I did tune linear advance on my Ender 3, you can see there's still some bulging in the corners going on as well. So my slicer of choice is Cura. I've been using Cura since the beginning of my Ender 3 kind of career, and it's basically what I'm used to. However, the Voron community really seems to like Super Slicer, so I decided to give that a go. I downloaded Super Slicer, set up the default profile, and printed a cube with the same filament. And this is the result. So one of these is a Cura cube, and one of them is a Super Slicer cube. At first glance, they look pretty similar, but if you look deeper, there are actually some very subtle differences, and I can say I definitely prefer one over the other. So I'll give you some time here to look over them before I reveal the result, but let me know which one you think is better. Okay, so here is the reveal. This one's the Cura one, this is the Super Slicer one. Looking at them side by side, you can see that the Super Slicer one is actually slightly kind of different in its surface finish. And you can see some sort of weird artifacts here in the corners of the Voron logo. They kind of stretch across, and it's not apparent in the Cura version. I don't know what that is, but that seems to be a thing. The Super Slicer version also has this kind of weird wrinkly surface. I don't know if you can see, but the wrinkles kind of take the place of the sort of ripples on the KIAUH version. Also here on the Super Slicer version's x-axis mark, you can see the X is not as crisp and it has some kind of weird funkiness going on around the edges. So flipping these over, you can see that the Super Slicer version here on the bridge underside has a weird kind of blobbing going on. On the KIAUH version, it's quite clean. So what's not apparent in this visual comparison is that the time it took to print these cubes was actually quite different. The KIAUH cube took 1 hour pretty much spot on, and the Super Slicer cube took 1 hour 20 minutes. So with a longer print time and an inferior surface quality, I think KIAUH wins out here. Now, that was before any tuning. After I did the LS tuning guide, which is basically setting up pressure advance and also tuning the extrusion multiplier, I printed another cube in KIAUH, and this is what I got. Obviously it's only half a cube because I ran out of filament halfway through, but it kind of serves as a good comparison anyway. So you can see, again, they're very similar. The bulging in the corners has been reduced. I wouldn't say they've been eliminated, but it's definitely been reduced to an amount I can live with. The surface finish seems to be ever so slightly better on the tuned version, the layers being a little bit more consistent. Otherwise, they're pretty much the same. So what do I think overall? I think the Voron is a really good upgrade from the Ender 3. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close, and there are a ton of mods out there that you can do to tune and get it print how you like. The Formbot kit was a dream to work with. Quality was good where it counted, and it was straightforward to put together. The price is also unbeatable, especially now that it includes a whole bunch of extra stuff that I didn't get when I purchased it. So what do you think? Will you be building one? I plan to make some more 3D printing related and maybe some non-related videos in the future, so if you want to keep up to date, feel free to subscribe and see you in the next video.